agenda, if you like, is I'll just do a short introduction, kind of set the scene of what we're talking about. Then we're going to have a contribution from George Barrett, who's a councillor from Barking and Dagenham, and from Councillors Against Cuts, and a contribution from Councillor Ben Duncan, who is from Brighton and Hove. Oh, there you are. Brighton and Hove Council. And then a general discussion, and that's the kind of main point of the meeting, is to get lots of views heard. Until about 4 o'clock, we thought we'd have a break then. There's tea and coffee over there. Please give a donation. And there's also an information table. We've got some leaflets there and some of our NHS campaign ribbons also for a donation. And then when we come back from the break, I'm going to ask Andy Richards, who's the chair of Brighton and Hove Local Government Branch of Unison, to make a short contribution, and more discussion. That second part hopefully focused on what we can do. And then we'll have summing up and announcements at the end. If you've got an event that you'd like announced, please come and find me in the break and I'll just do them all together. And I'll pass around this attendance list just so that we've got a record of how many people are here. And if you'd like to go on the Brighton People's Assembly mailing list, if you're not already, then just put your email address on here as well. Okay, so just to introduce the issues really, my feeling is there's three kind of key themes for the discussion that we need to have. And they are about power, about voice, and about solidarity. So this is just some thoughts that I put together over the last couple of days after reading the budget papers. It's about who has power in relation to Brighton and Hove Council's budget, or any local council's budget. It's not any of the councillors here today, and there's quite a few councillors, and thank you very much for coming. It's not the officers who put the budget together. It's not even Jason Kitcat, our dear leader. The power is with the government, who are cutting local government funding every year. They're putting extra pressure on services at the same time by pushing people further into poverty. And they prevent councils from raising more money by borrowing, making their own decisions about taxation. And this is a government of millionaires who are lifelong experts at dividing and ruling. And just as they have with the NHS and the benefit cuts and with things like fracking, the government are using the financial crisis to set us against each other, to create new business opportunities for their friends in private corporations, and to attack the very idea of public services. And that is the context in which we're talking about cuts in local government funding. It's a massive onslaught on us, and it's not surprising that we're on the back foot. So my second theme is about voice. I think we need to find our voice and start shouting louder. But if we're going to be heard, that means that everybody's voice has to be included. And crucially, it means that we need to find a way to hear and listen to the voices of people who are being affected by the cuts. So, in terms of this meeting, we're going to ask everyone to keep their contributions short and to the point, so that we can hear from as many people as possible, and especially from people who are personally affected. And please don't feel you have to have all the answers or a worked-out political line to speak here. In fact, if you do have a worked-out political line, please don't go on and on for too long. Please don't repeat what your comrade just said. Now, I've been reading the budget proposals. They were only published on Friday afternoon. I found this document particularly useful. It's the Equalities Impact Assessment, and it describes what they reckon the actual impact will be on people. There's just too many awful things in here to list them all. I was putting some of them on Twitter last night, and there's a summary up there that I put together. It was just heartbreaking reading it all and thinking about what it would actually mean. And I hope that people here will give some detail about stuff that they know about personally, through their work or through their use of services. But what struck me is that services for adults with learning disabilities are being hit particularly hard by these proposals. There's proposals to close residential homes, cut home care packages, close day centres, and remove subsidy from the supported employment provider, Able and Willing. And services for older people and adults with mental health difficulties are also looking at big cuts. It's being proposed to cut at least 7 social work posts from children's services, and to reduce care packages and short breaks for families with disabled children. and there's a proposal to cut funding for the homelessness prevention team. So the people who are affected by these cuts are the very people whose voices are heard least in society already. And I think, for me, campaigning against the cuts is very much about joining my voice with theirs and making sure that we can't be ignored. So, which brings me on to my third theme, which is about solidarity. And I think what we need to be discussing is how can we create a sense of solidarity across the people whose services are being cut, the people who work in those services, the workers whose jobs aren't being cut this year, council taxpayers and councillors. How can we refuse to be divided and ruled? So that's, for me, that's the topic of our discussion today, and what I'm really hoping for is some practical ideas about how we can disrupt things, how we can change, shift the power, shift the terms of the debate. It's not easy, I understand that, and we're not starting from a position of strength. But it seems to me that we have no choice but to make a start, however small. So I'd like to ask everyone to keep the discussion respectful and focused on how we can work together to change the story. If you want to speak when we get to the discussion, please put your hand up, please don't shout over other people, please introduce yourself as you start to speak. I will be favouring people who haven't spoken already. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'd just like to hand over to George Barrett from Barking and Dagenham and Councillors Against Cuts.
Right, okay. Well, I'm George Barrett, Independent Socialist Councillor of Barking and Dagenham. And just following on from what's just been said about the cuts, the chairman, the Tory chairman of the Local Government Association, Sir Cllr, has said that the latest round of cuts will drive many councils into bankruptcy. Right? And Sir Albert Bohr, who is a kind of right-wing leader of Birmingham City Council, says this is going to be the end of local government as we know it. Okay? So after a period of time, several years in fact, of cuts, where people have tried to cope as best they could with reduced powers, the rubber has finally hit the road, and this is really the crisis point. And the problem is what we're going to do about it, because we are faced with a fossilised political system we're not getting through. So what I'm going to talk about is the problems that we have, and I mean this has been a learning experience for me, because my past has been mainly on the far left, and I was kind of parachuted into being a councillor into Barking and Dagenham, where I was anonymous, and it's been an interesting learning experience. So I mean basically I was, we had this outbreak of BNP councillors in 2006. I thought I'd better do something locally that's a bit of a, bit of a backwater, so I joined the Labour Party, and in a very, very short space of time I found myself a ward chairman, and then I was asked to stand as a councillor because there was nobody else to stand in this ward against the BNP. So I said, all right, I won't be elected, so it'll be all right. And lo and behold, here we are. So I've been learning about local government, which has not been my area of expertise at all. I can, talk about Lenin and Trotsky, but not about local government. So anyway, here we are, chucked in the deep end. So one of the great problems that I found is that the actual fact, when you're elected, you have very, very little power, because about 80% of the local government budget comes from government. They call the shots, and so any money that a local council gets comes from parking fines and so forth. So things are very restricted. Not only that, but you're also in this funny position of the lack of democracy. Like, soon after I was elected, I wrote a letter to the local paper about some routine administrative thing, just stating a sort of point of view. And I was hauled in front of the Democratic Services Officer and the Standards Officer, who was a solicitor. And they told me, you cannot write letters to the local paper, now you're a councillor, it's got to go through the press office and the cabinet, and if it's all right then, we'll go ahead under somebody else's name. But basically, shut up. So that's the first thing. And it's been an interesting learning experience from then on. So basically, The snag is that you are dependent on expertise by professionals. So you've got your accountants and your town planners and your solicitors and all these people. And the difficulty is that all these people are heavily constrained by local government legislation. And so your freedom of action is very much circumscribed. Now, in the heroic past, we had these councillors in Poplar who, you know, did all sorts of things during World War I, and they were sent to prison, held council meetings in prison. We've had the Clay Cross councillors and Red Ted Knight. That is finished. You can't do anything these days, so you're very, very constrained. And the other problem is the structure of local councils in rotten boroughs, of which Barking is one. And basically, things are run by a cabinet clique, and they carefully avoid any disruption of what goes on. They just don't tell people what happens. They have discussions, they make decisions, they put it out to the council assembly to be rubber stamped, and that's it. So essentially, you've got this kind of very, very nasty authoritarian presence within local government. This is in Barking and Dagenham, which, as I say, is a rotten borough. Now, just to clarify things, I'm sure you've all heard of rotten boroughs, which before the 1832 Reform Act, you had these boroughs with about 6 or 8 voters because they had the property franchise, and the local landowner would lean on these people and bribe them and exert pressure to get his son or his nephew elected as local MP, and that's the way they kept power very much in their hands. Now, Barking and Dagenham is also a rotten borough, but for a somewhat different reason. Now, the structure of politics in the UK is that people battle over about 106 seats in parliamentary seats, and the rest are regarded as being safe seats. And these 106 are marginal seats. So basically, with the other 550 odd, they always return either a Tory or a Labour or maybe a Liberal Democrat.
Which
and
is particularly true in some parts of Cornwall and the Highlands of Scotland, for example. I mean, a rotten borough is defined by electoral reform society as basically a council area where at least 3/4
Yeah, I think George is still
of the
speaking
seats
there.
held by one party.
Thank you. That's been very constructive. So the point then is that because these local organisations are in the hands of cliques, the central Labour government machine keeps their hands off. As the old saying goes, they might be bastards and corrupt, but they're our corrupt bastards, right? So we let them get on with all the little fiddles and expensive swindles and all sorts of other nasty little things that happen. And anyway, the great resources of any political party, therefore, go into contesting these marginal seats with where the constituencies change hands at elections, and they can't be bothered about the rest because they are in fact safe seats. Now, I mean, Barking has always returned a Labour MP. We've got quite a good one at the moment, Margaret Hodge. But Brighton is quite different because you've got a marginal seat. I mean, it seems to be a three-way contest at the moment, four-way, whatever it is, and therefore you're going to see a lot of activity here. But one of the things about this is that these parties, certainly the Labour Party, it wins elections because it's got a party apparatus and records. And what they're able to do is to they keep a register of their electors, they make sure they're in touch with them, they know who will vote for them, and they can also deploy a centralised apparatus whereby they get all sorts of propaganda printed, and they deluge a marginal constituency with all this material, and they get enough people out to ensure they get 51% or just enough to actually get elected. And that is the problem that we're up against, because we do have these problems of the local structures with the corrupt authorities, and also the fact that the political parties are also ossified and they just look at the marginal seats. So one of the great things, if you want to see a different kind of country, which is going to be more green and more socialist and all the rest of it, we've really got to get to grips with all of these problems of the, who's going to vote for us. Because if you want to rally support in an election, you've got to know exactly who you can depend on. Okay, so what I'm doing then is to state the structures and the problems, and hopefully with the rest of the discussion we'll start to get some answers between ourselves. So what I'll do is I'll stop just there,
Okay.
and let you continue.
All right, thank you, George. Just to clarify, you voted against the cuts budget in Barking and Dagenham, didn't you?
That's right. Well, I mean, it was, this is a class struggle situation. I voted against the cuts, and I resigned from the council, and I was expelled from the Labour Party. Okay, so there are many members of council against the cuts who've done similar. They haven't resigned, but they're still working in their party machine. But I mean, there's a separate debate here on can you actually reclaim the Labour Party, which is obviously extremely dicey.
Okay, so let's hear a little contribution from Ben, and then we'll open up the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Dani. Well, I'm Ben Duncan. I'm one of the Green Councillors here in Brighton Hove. Before I start, I've got some numbers and facts and figures and stuff, but I just want to thank everyone for coming today, and particularly George. That was really, really interesting, and it's great to see so many people from the Greens and from other parties and from Brighton, Women Against the Cuts, and from the People's Assembly. It really feels like there's a lot of people in the city, and a lot of them are in this room, who really want to see something quite different than the same old politics as usual.